and I'm glad we did it. We'll just have to wait and see what happens with Republicans. The ball is in their court. They don't have to. They should have no wind behind their backs that Obama's going to change, because he's not going to. He's got a country to worry about.
Senator Reid, I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I read the papers down here and across the country. It makes it look as if the issue of whether or not we are going to move forward with the implementation of the health care bill passed a few years ago is just about politics. It's just a political football. It's being tossed back and forth between the two sides. And while the threats are really empty, there's no way that we are going to pass a continuing resolution that isn't going to include the funding of this vital health care law. It still gets an enormous amount of play out there. And I think it's important for us to come down to the floor and explain to the American people that this issue isn't political, that the health care law isn't just a piece of paper. The health care law is a lifeline to millions of families out there across America who have been absolutely drowning in health care costs and in inability to access the system over the past several decades. We didn't pass this law to score political points. We didn't do it to make ourselves feel good. We did it because we saw just almost immeasurable human suffering out on the streets of America that this place needed to respond to. That it's just not okay that in the most affluent, most powerful country in the world, about 15% of our society has the potential to go to bed sick every night simply because they can't afford to see a doctor. It's certainly not okay that 50% of the bankruptcies in this country historically have been caused by the misfortune of an individual or a family member to get sick. And so I think it's time that when we talk about the implementation of the health care law, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, we are talking about consequences that are not political. They are consequences related to life or death. That is not hyperbole. There are people out there every week dying because they don't have access to our nation's health care system, which, if you can find it, is and can be the best health care system in the world. The problem is there are far too many people who have no insurance and no way to access it, or who are vastly underinsured and can't get the right access to it. So I just want to take you through for 1 minute what this is going to mean to our constituents, to your neighbors, and what it would mean if by some miracle of politics the Tea Party gets its way and this bill was no longer the law of the land come next month. Let me tell you what it already means for a senior citizen who's living on $20,000 a year in New Britain, Connecticut. Today, that senior citizen gets to walk into their doctor to get a wellness visit. And they don't have to pay anything out of pocket any longer. Previously, they did, and you'd think that that's not a lot of money, but for somebody in Connecticut who's living on a fixed income, or somebody, Mr. President, in Delaware that's just taking home a pretty meager Social Security check every week, the costs escalate. When you're just trying to pay your rent or your mortgage, put food on the table, be able to gas up your car to get back and forth to see your grandkids, that extra expense of having to pay for preventative costs, that can actually make a difference. What makes more of a difference is for those seniors who have pretty high drug costs. One of the worst things this Congress did over the last 10 years was pass a prescription drug bill that had this donut hole sitting in the middle of it, so that if you paid for a bunch of drugs through the Medicare benefit, eventually you'd start having to pay out of your own pocket. That can be thousands of dollars that senior citizens don't have. This health care bill closes the donut hole, eliminates half of it almost overnight, and then essentially eliminates it over time. That's thousands of dollars in savings for seniors. That's medication that, frankly, a lot of seniors would have never been able to buy that they will now be able to access because of this law. Those things go away if Republicans get their way and Obamacare is defunded. All of a sudden, if that happens, tomorrow senior citizens have to pay out of pocket for preventative costs, and seniors who have high drug costs all of a sudden go back to having to pay 100% of the cost of generics versus 50%, which is what they're paying now. That's a real cost. What about the average family of 4 out there who today in Connecticut is paying about $605 a month for health care? And probably a health care plan that's not even that good to begin with, probably has some significant holes in it in terms of what it will cover. Well, if this health care bill is implemented, which it will be, that number goes from $605 a month down to $286 a month for the average family of 4 in Connecticut. Let me tell you, the average family of 4 in Connecticut living in Stamford or Bridgeport or Norwalk or Norwich, they could use that extra $300 in savings to help save for college, to help put a little bit more nutritious meal on the table, maybe to pay some back credit card bills. $300 a month is a big deal. That is the difference that this health care bill will make. $605 a month down to $286 a month in Connecticut. Big difference. And an even bigger difference because the health care plan they're going to get for $286 a month is going to be a good one. We're going to finally have some standardization when it comes to the benefits that you're getting so that when you go out there and buy a health care plan in Connecticut or wherever you are, you're going to know what you're getting. There's going to be a minimum set of benefits that are going to be covered. You're going to be able to know that when you buy insurance, you're getting ambulatory patient services, you're getting coverage for hospitalization, you're getting coverage for maternity and newborn care, that your prescription drugs are covered, that you're getting lab services and rehab benefits. Every plan is going to be able to cover these things, but not if the health care bill was magically repealed. All of a sudden, people that were counting on that number coming down from $600 to $300 in Connecticut will be paying $600 and probably $700 and $800, and they will continue to have to deal with a dizzying array of benefit packages, many of which just simply don't measure up to what families need. What about for Betty Berger? What does this mean for her? She's a constituent of mine in Meriden, and she doesn't want anybody to ever have to go what she went through. She and her husband had health care coverage for them and their kids through her husband's plan. Her husband switched jobs, and in the week's time between which he was at his first job and his second job, their son was diagnosed with cancer. Her husband's second job identified it as a pre-existing condition and effectively refused to cover the son. The Bergers lost everything. They lost their house, they lost their car, they lost their savings simply because their son was diagnosed with cancer during the 1 week in which the husband wasn't employed. That will never, ever happen again after this bill is implemented. No insurance plan regulated under this bill can deny a family access for health care simply because one of their family members is sick. It's unconscionable that that ever happened in this country, and it will not happen again if this bill is implemented. But if the Republicans get what they want and this bill is defunded, if this bill is repealed, in that magical fantasy world, the example of the Bergers happens hundreds and thousands of times over across this country. And lastly, what about the McCullough family? Another family in Connecticut. Little Kyle McCullough, when I first met him, he was 8. He's probably 10, 11 years old. He's got a very complicated disease that he has to take $3,000 injections for. He will hit his lifetime limit in a matter of years, and his family will be on the hook for every expense thereafter. The health care bill says no more lifetime limits for health care coverage. If you have health care insurance, it's going to take care of little Kyle McCullough for as long as he needs those injections, at whatever cost it's going to be. That's why it's insurance, because for people that get a bad lot in life and have a big, complicated, expensive illness, they're going to be covered. If the health care bill is repealed or defunded or whatever Republicans want to do, Kyle McCullough's family has to pay for that out of pocket for the rest of their life, as will thousands of other families like him. That's what the stakes are, Mr. President. It's not a piece of paper. It's not a political football. It's life and death. It's hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars that hardworking families throughout this country desperately need, and a health care system that they need to be much more fair and much more compassionate. It's not going to happen. It is political fantasy that Republicans are going to be able to defund or repeal the health care law as a consequence of the budget debates that we're going to have over the next few weeks. But let's be honest about what they are asking. They are asking for higher costs for seniors. They are asking for higher costs for middle-class families. They are asking for more bankruptcies. And they're asking for more misery for the thousands of families who are struggling to keep their head above water when they deal with a complicated illness. That, Mr. President, is the true reality of what's happening out there today in our healthcare system that is getting better by the day and will get better even still if we move forward with the implementation of the healthcare law. I yield the floor and note the absence of quorum. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senators held the last vote of the week today on a House-passed bill that allows the Energy Department to sell helium from the National Reserve. There are some changes to the bill, so it'll go back to the House. Wanted to let you know that we covered a hearing today held by the House Oversight Committee investigating last year's attack in Benghazi, Libya, where 4 Americans were killed. The Associated Press writes that House Republicans badgered former UN Ambassador Thomas Pickering and former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Admiral Mike Mullen over their review of the Obama administration's handling of the matter and asked why former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and other top administration officials were not questioned during the inquiry. During the hearing, one committee member, Representative John Mica of Florida, called the report by Pickering and Mullen a whitewash. You can see part of the hearing tonight here on C-SPAN 2 at 8 Eastern, and the entire hearing anytime at cspan.org. Some of the events we're covering tomorrow, EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy will talk about the administration's climate plan, specifically about carbon pollution reduction. That's at 9 a.m. Eastern. The House Education Subcommittee on the Workforce will hold a hearing on technical education and training programs in the morning at 10 Eastern. And President Obama will speak at a Ford auto plant near Kansas City, Missouri. That's at 1:45 Eastern. And you can look for those events tomorrow on the C-SPAN networks and at cspan.org. A short time ago, we heard from Senate Democrats talking about the temporary federal spending bill. Now the Republicans.
Got everybody? Well, let me thank you for being here today. I mean, today is a great day for the American people. Over the last several weeks, we have all been in discussions, both House and Senate, as to how best to accomplish the goals that we all believe in. And that is, number one, keeping the government open and protecting our constituents from the harmful effects of Obamacare. We want to thank the House leadership, Speaker Boehner, Leader Kevin McCarthy, for moving forward in such a bold fashion to put this bill on the floor tomorrow, of which we're in full support of. We want to thank them for listening not only to our conferences, but also to the voices in which we represent from our districts, and that's our constituents. I expect that we'll have a very strong showing in the House tomorrow as we vote on this bill, and I encourage all our House Republicans to support the bill. But as we turn to the Senate, make no mistake, it turns to Harry Reid. And the question will be posed to him, and it's a choice he's going to have to make. Will he protect the American people from the harmful effects of Obamacare, or will he coldly force this upon them? The other question is that he's going to have to answer to the American people is, why is he willing to protect big business and special interest from the dangers of this health care law and yet not protect the hardworking families of America? We have made our choice, and we're making it clear today. We are here to protect the American people. Now the question turns to Harry Reid. What will Harry do? Now I'd like to turn over to Senator from Utah. Thanks.
Yesterday was a great day. It was a day of victory for the many, many millions of Americans who have been speaking with a sustained voice over the last 2 months on this issue. I want to thank and congratulate Speaker Boehner for making the courageous decision to stand with my friend Representative Graves and my other House colleagues who are up here with me today, and most importantly for standing with the American people to bring forward this legislation that will keep government funded, keep everything in government funded while defunding Obamacare. This is an important step. It's one supported by the American people. According to one recent poll, some 56% of Americans believe that Congress should pass a continuing resolution that funds government while defunding Obamacare. We look forward to the passage of this resolution, and once that happens, we look forward to that resolution coming over to the Senate, where we demand, we expect, we hope to have an up or down vote so that the people's elected representatives in that body can have an opportunity to weigh in on whether or not they're willing to protect the American people, both from a shutdown and from the undue, risky consequences of this unwise health care legislation. Thank you.
Jim.
Everyone knows this law is not ready. You know, just listen to Republicans. You listen to Democrats. Max Baucus called it a train wreck. Howard Dean said it's going to lead to rationing of care. James Hoffa said it's fundamentally going to change the 40-hour work week, going to hurt working Americans. Everyone, including the president. The president knows this law is not ready. That's why he delayed it for big business, said you don't have to comply with the employer mandate. The Chicago Tribune, the president's hometown newspaper, endorsed him twice, said in their editorial 3 weeks ago, delay the entire law. So everyone knows this thing is not ready. Frankly, I don't think it'll ever be ready. So let's just do what the American people expect us to do. Let's fund our government, and let's delay a bill, delay a law that's not ready. That's bad for the country. Simple as that. So I just want to commend my colleague, Tom Graves, for the work he's done and the rest of the folks up here. And frankly, our leadership for understanding, look, we want to stay on the side of the American people, do what's best for this country. and fund our government and make sure this law doesn't happen. 2 months ago, conventional wisdom in Washington said this day was impossible. And yet I want to commend Boehner, the American people, and for leading. For the House of Representatives to stand up and vote to defund Obamacare is a tremendous victory to the American people. And ultimately, that is where this battle will be resolved. In just a matter of weeks, over 1.4 million Americans have signed a national petition to defund Obamacare because it's the biggest job killer in this country, and it is hurting Americans, millions of Americans who are losing their jobs, who are forcibly being pushed into part-time work, 29 hours a week, who are seeing skyrocketing health insurance premiums, and who are losing their health insurance. Obamacare isn't working. With the House of Representatives' historic leadership, the ball now moves to the Senate and to Harry Reid. This is a moment for Republicans to unite, for every Senate Republican to stand shoulder to shoulder with the gentleman here and the Republicans in the House who have been courageous doing the right thing. And this is a moment ultimately for Harry Reid and the Democrats to decide for whom is it they work. In my view, every elected official should listen to the American people, and the American people are united. Obamacare isn't working. It's killing jobs. And the people who are hurt the most by Obamacare are the most vulnerable among us, young people, Hispanics, African Americans, single moms. They're the ones losing their jobs. They're the ones being pushed into 29 hours a week. And so today is a day to celebrate the historic leadership of the House of Representatives, and today is a day to continue to get ready to move forward for every elected official in Washington to listen to the American people.
Many of you today will be writing about what happens here in Washington, D.C., but the real story is about what is happening back on Main Street in our districts. That's the real story. Town hall after town hall, I heard real stories about jobs that were lost, health care coverage that was promised but now is not being delivered. And yet what we see is that we focus on the fight here when the fight really is about working with the hardworking American taxpayers back home. You know, the President has talked that this is a bill that just needs a little bit of tweaking, as if it were an app on an iPhone. But the problem is that an app on the iPhone, when it doesn't work, game over has one meaning. Game over has a totally different meaning when we're talking about health care. And it is time that we fight together. And I just want to applaud our leadership, Speaker Boehner, and challenge those in the Senate to stand with the American people and make sure that we turn the tide on what shouldn't have been implemented in the first place.
This is the reason that I came to Congress. The reason I came to Congress after a 12-year hiatus was because this bill is so oppressive and so hurtful, both to small businesses, individuals, and I believe the American economy, that I decided to come back. I'm proud to be part of this fight. What's more, I'm really proud of my Republican leadership. I'm proud of the Speaker for standing up and for listening to the American people. I think it's wonderful. This really, I don't know that it's Democrats against Republicans. Sometimes I think it's more Washington establishment against Main Street Americans. And I think that ultimately Main Street America has to win. One other thing I'd like to just comment on, the President knows, he knows that this law isn't ready for prime time. That's why he has postponed 41 out of 82 of the provisions of Obamacare. They've either postponed them, changed them, or altered them. Everybody in this town knows that it's not ready for prime time. The exchanges are supposed to open on October 1st, and none of them are ready. In Arizona, we're several months away. And one of our community college districts in Arizona, the Maricopa Community College District, the largest one, has already reclassified 1,300 full-time employees to part-time status. This is bad stuff, and we have to do everything we can to halt it, stop it, and I hope that the President and Harry Reid care more about the American people and keeping government open as we do than their stubborn political pride, and that's all this is about.
Well, I can tell you After August, it was clear where the public in my district is. They want Obamacare repealed. They want it defunded. They want it dismantled. They want it to go away. I talked to businesses. Just recently, I talked to a business. They've got 57 employees. They're trying to get down to 49. Other businesses are moving full-time workers to part-time workers. And this is not unique to the 1st District of Oklahoma. This is happening across our country. And if you look at the jobs reports, that's what you'll see, which is why it's so important to our economy that this law be halted. I'd like to double down on the thank you to the leadership in the House of Representatives for listening not only to the people but to the members of Congress as they have come and expressed their views. I would also like to thank Senator Mike Lee, Senator Ted Cruz for their leadership on this. It's been said that first you win the argument, then you win the vote. And these two gentlemen have been out in front on this, winning the argument day in and day out. The American people are with them, so are many of us in the United States Congress, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow's vote.
I'm going to be very brief. Most of you have written stories about how important it is for Washington to compromise. I would dare say that every person who's here at this podium who has spoken to you today and who will speak to you today would want to get rid of Obamacare completely. But the reality is that we have realized that the President and his party are not going to get rid of Obamacare.
Dispense with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we continue to see that the special interest groups remain undaunted in their efforts to ram through an immigration bill that will do real damage to the wages and job prospects of working Americans. That's just a plain fact. Consider the economic situation we find ourselves in now. Inflation-adjusted wages, that's the way to compare wages correctly over time, are lower today than they were in 1999. This is a steady decline, and actually new numbers indicate lower than they were since 1995. Working Americans are not having their wages go up, their wages are going down. Median household income is lower today. Median income, which is the best way to account for how families are doing, is lower today than it's been every single year since 1989. The size of the workforce today has shrunk to a 35-year low. We have the lowest workplace participation since 1975, and a record number of Americans are on welfare, including almost 1 in 6 on food stamps. So we still have this determination, it seems, by our masters of the universe, people who know so much better that what we really need in America is more workers. I would contend it's quite plain, with high unemployment, low job prospects, declining workplace participation, declining wages, what we have a shortage of is not workers, we have a shortage of jobs. And we need to put our people in those jobs. And that's a very simple concept. And I think it's undisputable. That's why I care about this issue. I think we have to talk about it. And what we're talking about, remember now, is not to end immigration. We're not talking about anything like that. We're talking about maintaining the greatest immigration flow of any nation in the world, or maybe the history of the world, 1.1 million a year, plus a very generous worker program, a guest worker program where people come in just to work. So, I mean, we can support that, but this bill that passed the Senate would have doubled the number of guest workers, increased by at least 50%, over 1.5 million a year coming permanently, in addition to legalizing 11 million that entered unlawfully. And I truly believe that it cannot be sustained that this is good for the vast majority of the American people. And what we're finding is, what we're seeing routinely is the one interest that's being omitted in all this debate is the interest of the average or working American, the average citizen of this country who goes to work every day. Everybody else has their interest. Everybody else is raising money. They're putting ads on the television. They're spinning this and they're spinning that. But the average guy is getting hammered by this. It just is so. Let me just show some of the things that are going on, and I'll run through this, and I think it's important for us to know. Here in Politico, September 17th, it starts off saying Nancy Pelosi is huddling with Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, top labor leaders, and former AOL executive Steve Case in separate meetings this week as supporters of Capitol Hill reform try to revive the issue. After getting hammered so badly by the American people when it passed through the Senate, it was pronounced dead on arrival in the House, and they're trying to revive it. The article goes on to state that the House Republicans bristled when a group of senators met with outside groups supporting immigration reform and formulated a campaign-style strategy to target more than 100 House Republicans over the August recess to try to pound them in submission, I guess. And despite this blowback, Senator Schumer, the so-called leader of the Gang of Eight, the leader of the Gang of Eight, to be frank, continued to work the phones over August recess with a clear message: please get active and get the reform back on the agenda in the House. And he reached out to all of his allies to tell them to go forward, and he said, quote, "We had a very good August. I don't think it's dead by any stretch of the imagination." Well, I think he does not want it dead, and I think he's working hard to keep it alive. But somebody needs to make clear to the American people it's not dead. It could be revived. There's special interest out there, traditional Republican allies, as well as strong Democratic liberal activists who are pushing for this legislation. So our friends say they want comprehensive immigration reform. But what does this phrase really mean? What does it really mean? Isn't that what we should ask? Well, they want a large increase in future low-skilled immigration combined with immediate amnesty for those that are here illegally and a promise of enforcement in the future. And that promise was proven to be worthless. The first legislation that stayed on the floor for weeks, went through the committee, would only have reduced the illegal flow about 25%. They promised it was the toughest bill in history, but the Congressional Budget Office, our independent analysis, proved it would have only minor impact on the illegality, while doubling the number of guest workers, increasing substantially the number of annual flow of immigrants who want to be here permanently, plus amnesty for the 11 million. Instead of what we would normally expect to legalize over 10 years, 10 million, we would legalize 30 million under this bill. That's what they proposed here in the Senate. Well, I don't think this is good for America, and I don't think the American people want that to happen. So, notice that the one group not represented in all of this are U.S. citizens, the American people. In a recent interview, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Tom Donahue, a great American, and I know him and respect him, this is what he said is going on. And people who are concerned about this issue need to pay attention, because he's one of the driving forces. He's meeting with La Raza, he's meeting with the Democrats, he's meeting with Senator Schumer, he's meeting with others. He wants more workers, apparently. An agreement, I'm reading now in businessreport.com, an agreement between the nation's business lobby and the AFL-CIO was crucial to passing immigration reform in the Senate, says U.S. Chamber of Commerce President Thomas Donahue. He spoke today at a breakfast by the BRAC, business group, I guess. Unions are looking for new members, Mr. Donahue says, while businesses need both laborers and highly skilled workers, close quote. Now, this is a frank statement. I give Mr. Donahue credit. He lays it right out there. If you want to know the forces at work here, unions believe that if we legalize people and bring in more, they'll have a better chance of adding to union members. Quote, unions are looking for new members, said Mr. Donahue. That's their interest. They've forgotten the interest of their workers today, the ones that are working and having wages decline and are being laid off. But Mr. Donahue goes on to say, while businesses need both laborers and highly skilled workers. Now, I'm going to say we can bring in new workers, and under the current guest worker program and our current immigration program. And we can deal compassionately with people who've been here a long time. We can do that, but not with the legislation that came out of the Senate. Donahue says the House doesn't need to pass a comprehensive reform. Listen to this, colleagues. The House doesn't need to pass a big comprehensive reform, suggesting problems could be fixed with smaller bills. Take the whole thing, go to conference with the Senate, and we'll build a bill, close quote. So those of us who care about how legislation is crafted can feel the hair rise on the back of our necks when you hear this, because this is exactly what they're trying to accomplish. They want the House to pass a bill or two that's tough, it looked like it's tough on enforcement, go to conference, take the Senate bill, which is a total disaster, and build a bill that he likes, bring it back to the floor of both chambers where no amendments can be offered, and ram it through, to some degree like the massive health care bill was rammed through. That's what they want to do. And so I think the House needs to be careful about this. Once you go to conference, and once you start meeting with these special groups, the Democrats want votes, union members want members, businesses want cheap labor, immigrant groups want to bring more and more. Where's the American people in this group? Who's paying for these ads they run on television? It's not the average guy. I don't know any average guys sending them money to run these ads. It's people who won't have interest, special interest in it. Well, just a few days ago, a remarkable event happened. Get this, that human resource managers for some of the nation's largest business groups, that is the people in charge of hiring in America, sent a letter to the House leaders claiming that many of our companies continue to have difficulty finding sufficient American workers. This is the letter they wrote. These are big companies. You'll recognize the names. I'll call some of them. And they say there are not enough workers to fill certain lesser skilled positions. Thus, in addition to addressing the need for more highly skilled immigrants, quote, we strongly support efforts to bolster the availability of a workforce at all skill levels. They'd originally tried to say this bill was designed to bring in more high-skilled workers and reduce the number of lower-skilled workers because of our unemployment problems and other reasons. But they openly say they want all skills. So the question is, are these businesses really suffering from a labor shortage? Are they really? Byron York, writing in, I believe, the Washington Examiner, excellent writer, looked at that question. And this is what he found, quote, at the same time, corporate officers seek higher number of immigrants, both low-skill and high-skill. Many of their companies are laying off thousands of workers. Isn't that something? Could that be true? Well, let's look at his article. pretty damning, it seems to me. So remember, this letter I just read you saying that they have to have more low-skilled workers from the human resource officials was analyzed by Mr. Byron York in the Washington Examiner. He finds, quote, the officials represent companies with a vast array of business interests. General Electric, Walt Disney Company, Marriott International, Hilton Worldwide, Hyatt Hotels Corporations, McDonald's Corporations, the Wendy's Company, Coca-Cola, the Cheesecake Factory, Johnson & Johnson, Verizon Communications, Hewlett-Packard, General Mills, and many more. All want to see increases in the immigration levels for low-skilled as well as high-skilled workers, in addition to a path to citizenship for the millions currently in the United States illegally, close quote. Well, what did Mr. York discover? Of course, he says the U.S. immigration rate is at 7.3%, with millions of American workers at all skill levels out of work, millions more so discouraged they have left the workforce altogether. In addition, at the same time, the corporate officers seek higher numbers of immigrants, both low-skilled and high-skilled. But while they're doing that, many of their companies are laying off workers. They say they need more workers. How could it be they're laying off workers? For example, Mr. York finds Hewlett-Packard, whose Executive Vice President for Human Resources, Tracy Keogh, signed the letter, laid off 29,000 workers last year in 2012. So they want more foreign workers, and they just laid off 29,000 Americans? Oh, boy, that's a stunning number. Go look at this. It goes on. In August of this year, Cisco Systems, whose Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer Kathleen Westlock signed the letter, announced plans to lay off 4,000 in addition to the 8,000 cut in the last 2 years. So they've laid off 12,000 people, and now they can't find people willing to work or can work. United Technologies, whose Senior Vice President of Human Resources and Organization, Elizabeth B. Amato, signed the letter. They laid off 3,000 people this year. American Express, whose Chief Human Resource Officer, L. Kevin Cox, signed the letter, cut 5,400 jobs last year. Maybe they ought to try to give some of those jobs to the people they laid off. Many of them probably worked for them for 20 years or more. Procter & Gamble, whose Chief Human Resources Officer, Mark F. Bigger, signed the letter, announced plans to cut off 5,700 jobs last year. This is really offensive to me, and I think should be to all Americans. This is the kind of leadership we have from corporate America, coming in here and saying they've got to have workers, totally ignoring the fact they're laying them off by the thousands. Well, maybe they find someone to work for cheaper. Maybe that's what the interest is. Those are just a few of the layoffs at companies whose officials signed the letter. Mr. York says, he goes on to say, quote, a few more. T-Mobile announced 2,250 layoffs in 2012. Archer Daniels Midland laid off 1,200. Texas Instrument laid off nearly 2,000. Cigna, 1,300. Verizon sought to cut 1,700 jobs by buyouts and layoffs. Marriott announced hundreds of layoffs this year. International Paper has closed plants and laid off dozens. I'll just note parenthetically, last week it was announced in Alabama that International Paper was closing a plant with 1,100 people, many of whom worked there 25 and 30 years, off, out of work, plant shuttered. But they're signing the bill saying they need more workers. And General Mills, in what the Minneapolis Star-Tribune called a rare mass layoff, laid off 850 people last year. There are more still, Mr. York says. According to a recent Reuters report, Mr. York reports that U.S. employers, quote, announced 50,462 layoffs in August, up 34% from the previous month, and up 57% from August of last year, 2012, close quote. Well, it's difficult to understand how they can justify demands that we ran through an immigration bill, doubling the number of workers, increasing dramatically the number of people that would be permanent residents of the United States, claiming they need workers, while these very same companies, all of these signed the letter. We're laying off thousands of workers. We just simply have to be realistic. Well, Senator Schumer is meeting with business groups to pressure Republicans to join him in conference. But what do conservative thinkers have to say about Senator Schumer's plan? And I'll just share a few comments, and there are many more from intellectuals and writers, some conservative, some maybe not conservative. But the National Review, the oldest conservative organ, wrote this, quote, by more than doubling the number of so-called guest workers admitted each year, the bill would help create a permanent underclass of the foreign workers. The creation of a huge population of second-class workers is undesirable from the point of view of the American national interest, which should be our guiding force in this matter. The United States is a nation with an economy, not an economy with a nation. And I think that was very good. Bill Kristol, who's on the Fox News, the editor of the Weekly Standard, joined with Rich Lowry, the editor of the National Review, in an odd, unusual joint editorial, and went on to lay out deep concerns about the passage of this. They say, quote, passing any version of the Gang of Eight's bill would be worse public policy than passing nothing. House Republicans can do the country a service by putting a stake in its heart, close quote. Victor Davis Hanson, he's written a book on immigration, is an excellent columnist in California. Quote, the United States may be suffering the most persistent unemployment since the Great Depression. There may be unemployment rate over 15% in many small towns in the American Southwest, and he's right about that. American businesses may be flush with record amounts of cash, and farm prices may be at record levels, but we're still lectured that without more cheap labor from the south of the border, business can simply not profit. Peter Kirsanow, a member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, who's dealt with these issues for years, they've had hearings on them and tried to analyze the meaning and impact of these immigration flows. He wrote this, recent history shows that a grant of legal status to illegal immigrants results in a further influx of illegal immigrants who will crowd out low-skilled workers from the workforce, They had hearings on this in the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Before the federal government grants, he says, legal status to illegal immigrants, serious deliberation must be given to the effect such grant will have on the employment and earning prospects of low-skilled Americans. History shows that granting such legal status is not without profound and substantial cost to American workers. Does Congress care? Close quote. Thomas Sowell, the great African-American writer, says this, quote, jobs that Americans will not do are in fact jobs at which not enough Americans will work at the current wage. that some employers are offering. This is not an uncommon situation. That is why labor shortages lead to higher wages. Virtually every kind of work Americans will not do is, in fact, work that Americans have done for generations. Close quote. Look, salaries do make a difference. David Frum, quote, "The United States is entering its 6th year of extraordinarily high unemployment. 12 million Americans who want work cannot find it. Millions more have quit searching. Slack labor markets have depressed wages throughout the country. Yet, however little workers earn, there's always somebody who wishes they earned less. And for those somebodies, the solution is import more cheap labor, but not just any cheap labor that cannot quit, cannot accept a better offer, cannot complain," close quote. And there's too much truth in that. There's too much truth in that, and I'm concerned about it, and I think Americans should be concerned about it. This is a bill that is anti-worker, and President Obama has said recently that Republicans want to accelerate the gap, the wealth gap between the rich and the poor. That is not so. But his own White House has been the central entity driving behind the scenes as much as they possibly can be, because they don't want their fingerprints on it, or they don't want it to be identified with the White House. But they've been the central entity pushing the bill. It will have a direct impact on the wages and employment status of millions of Americans, particularly low-income Americans, who are the ones who've had their wages decline the most. Professor Borjas at Harvard, himself a Cuban refugee, is the leading national expert on immigration and wages, and he has documented we've had a significant decline in wages over the last 30 years, and that a significant portion of that decline is directly related to the large flow of immigrant labor into America. So, and of course, it's been accelerated by the illegality that's occurring in our country, in addition to the legal flow. I think we could sustain something like the current legal flow, but we need to end the illegality, and we should not pass legislation that doubles the number that will be coming in. So, polls show overwhelmingly that the American people do not support a large increase in guest workers or low-skilled immigration. For instance, by a 3-to-1 margin, Americans earning under $30,000 support a decrease in legal immigration, not an increase, not a doubling of it. I'm sure most don't have any idea that Congress is about to pass a law that would double the amount. But the one group that's not been represented in this conversation has been the hard-working people of this country. All Americans, immigrants, millions who've come to our country, and the native-born alike, will be hurt by an immigration plan that is guaranteed to reduce wages and permits even more lawlessness in the future. What makes America unique is the special reverence we place in the rule of law and the special faith we place in the everyday citizens. Let's stay fast to those principles. Let's stand firm for those principles. So let me say one more time, the heart of the American people on the question of immigration is good and decent. They are not, and they've been misportrayed as opposing all immigration. Not so. But they are concerned about the lawlessness. They believe a great nation, their nation, should have a lawful system of immigration, and people ought not to, by the millions, violate those laws. And Congress and the presidents have failed to respond to their legitimate request year after year, decade after decade. It's time for that to end. We need a lawful system of immigration that serves our national interest, that we can be proud of, that allows a number of people to come to this country, as many as we can, but we have to know that they have a chance to get a good job. Their children will have a chance to get a good job, and we're not displacing American workers who need jobs at a bit higher wage instead of a falling wage. That's what this country ought to be about. It was not part of the bill that passed this Senate that's now waiting to go to the House. And the House needs to be very careful when they move forward, if they move forward with any legislation, that they don't go to a secret conference committee and all kinds of provisions driven by the AFL-CIO and by the Chamber of Commerce and by La Raza and by Democratic politicians who want votes. They got to be sure that's not who's writing this bill, because that's who's been writing it so far. It ought not to happen. So I want to say that the openness with which the advocates for this bill have discussed what they're trying to do is rather remarkable. I hope it's a signal to our House members to be alert, to do the right thing as they go forward and try to move a bill that ends the illegality, that identifies what the right flow of immigrants into America is, and creates a system that will actually work in a practical way in the future. And we'll deal compassionately with people that have been here a long time and who've tried to otherwise be good citizens and do the right thing. I would thank the chair and would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
No more votes are expected here in the Senate this week after senators approved a bill dealing with the National Helium Reserve by a vote of 97-2. On the other side of the Capitol, momentarily in the House, they're expected to vote on a nutrition assistance bill that would end food stamps for some 3.8 million people. The USA Today reports that some 47.6 million people, or nearly 15% of the population, get food stamps, with an average benefit of $133.19 per person each month. We heard Senate Republicans earlier talking about the temporary spending bill that defunds the health care law, and this afternoon the House passed the rule that sets the guidelines for how that continuing resolution will be debated on the House floor. A general debate on that funding bill is expected tomorrow in the House.
Ms. Ayers.